How does the JFK assassination fit into this very strange story of Dr. Mary's monkey? We'll find out when we come back on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back. We're with Ed Haslam. We're talking about Dr. Mary's monkey. How does all this, and I'm going to spend some time, Ed, talking with you about the cancer epidemic here, but how does this all turn into the JFK connection?
Well, let me just go for the jugular on that.
Let's do it.
We know that the former president of the American Cancer Society is the person that set up the media coverage of Lee Oswald's leafleting and stuff in New Orleans in the summer of 1963. We know this because he, the former president of the American Cancer Society, whose name is Dr. Alton Ochsner Sr., actually produced a record album of Oswald's radio debates, which said that he was responsible for it. And I've got a copy of that here in the house, and that's in the book. And so there is once you realize you've connected these two people, this lone nut thing just goes away. And then when you realize that what they're doing is they're trying to kill Castro, well, so much for the Commie Pinko thing. I mean, what they're trying to do is set up Oswald to look like he's doing that. And Oswald starts to get suspicious about all this. I mean, they're telling him, hey, we're going to smuggle you into Cuba, and you're going to deliver this bioweapon to our friendly doctors down there, and they're going to kill Castro and all this other stuff. But Oswald starts to realize that that's not really the target. Kennedy's the target. And that's where this whole thing leads. And George, I manage my own website, and just during the break, I put something up there for the coast-to-coast viewers that tonight and tonight only, they can get my book signed by me for less than they can get it on Amazon. So if they want to go to Dr. Mary's Monkey, and you spell it Dr. D-O-C-T-O-R, Mary's Monkey, they can get that there tonight for that special coast-to-coast price.
Okay. So why do they really want to get rid of Kennedy, then? I mean, is it, as we've always heard, the fact that he didn't go back into Cuba, he didn't give support to the Bay of Pigs, involvement with the mob. Was it all this?
Kennedy thought he was president, and he didn't have to listen to all these people, and that's not the way this country works. There's power in this country, and if they put you in the White House, and if you don't do what they want to, they get rid of you. I mean, that's kind of what it boils down to. I mean, ultimately, you got to ask them what was in their mind, but to me, that's the logical conclusion on this, that Kennedy was messing with stuff that they didn't want him messing with. He was messing with the Federal Reserve. He was messing with civil rights. He was not supporting the war in Vietnam. In fact, he was getting ready to pull out. The people that own all that stuff didn't like that.
Also, don't forget, he wanted to change the Federal Reserve System.
Yeah. I mean, so all of that. You're messing with the deep vein of power in the most powerful country in the world. And when you do that, when you cross those people, they take you out, as Lee Oswald found out.
So what I find fascinating, the players involved in the monkey virus scandal, I'll call it a scandal, were the same players involved in the JFK assassination.
Well, there's some connection there. It takes a lot of analysis to figure out who did what, but there are connections there. And these people are all working together. Some of them were being lied to by other people. I mean, it's the way this game works. But Oswald was at the center of it, and he figured out before he went to Dallas that he was going to Dallas to be part of this. And he basically felt it was his job. He was working for somebody. Oswald's a plant, okay? And I get into this in the book in terms of how does this guy who supposedly defected to the Soviet Union get back in the United States with a get-out-of-jail-free card?
Yeah, exactly. And as you know, when Oswald was arrested for the assassination of JFK, he said he was a patsy.
That's right. And he asked for legal representation, which he never got.
But he was in Dallas, obviously. And do you think he was part of that assassination team at all?
He penetrated it. This part of the thing, which kind of get into in Dr. Mary's Monkey, but the book Me and Lee, which Judy was in close contact with Lee by phone all the way up to the assassination. She talked to him on Wednesday night before the assassination on Friday, and he was telling her what he was dealing with. And all of that is in that Me and Lee book, which is why Jim Marrs is writing the afterword, and I'm writing the forward on it. So those are questions that we'll be happy to talk about once the book is released, but we're sort of under an agreement not to discuss the details.
I understand. Will it be dramatically different from what we already think we know?
I think it is. I think it's a breakthrough book that is just presenting a whole new view on this thing, and from somebody who was there, who was in personal contact with Lee on a daily basis. And, he figured out by the end of July that this is where that was going.
All right. Now, Kennedy wasn't going to go public with the monkey virus situation, was he?
Well, I don't think he could.
Okay.
I mean, he inherited that situation. One of the questions that this gets into is who knew what. And one of the things that I find most interesting is that when Richard Nixon, who was vice president during this whole disaster and who was officially
under Eisenhower,
right, when he gets into office, in the first week in office, he declares war on cancer. And he takes these resources, these bioweapon resources that have been over at Fort Detrick, and he moves them over to the National Tumor Lab at NCI. That's an awfully interesting opening move for a presidency. It's like he's already spent a lot of time thinking about this.
Right. He knew something. He knew something indeed. Now, let's spend some time now talking about cancer, and then we'll open up some phone calls later. This has been, something that has raced through this world, raced through this country at a all-time high. It's the reason for the death rates in this country. How much of it, in your opinion, Ed, you're not a doctor, is attributable to this contaminated monkey virus from the 50s?
A huge portion of it. And let me frame it this way. We all associate lung cancer with cigarettes at this point.
Right.
But when Dr. Alton Oshner was in medical school, he was woken up in the middle of the night to go down and observe an autopsy on a man who had lung cancer, because it was said that it was so rare that he would probably not see another case in his medical career. I mean, that's how rare cancer used to be. And we have 300% more cancer than our grandparents did. And why? And I think I can point to, just in the statistics, about 60% of our current epidemic. And the reason it's soft tissue is that all the various cells in the body do not reproduce at the same rate. The things that reproduce the fastest, one is the brain cells and the neuroglia. One is the skin cells, the reproductive tissues, and the lymph system is cleaning out the entire body. So these are the cells that are turning over fastest, and because of that, they're more likely to hit that 1 in 200 number that I was talking about earlier.
You said it's sexually transmittable, but does it also transmit to the fetus? And does that baby carry it into their adult life, the cancer virus?
I have seen studies by MDs on this, which say they are finding it in second-generation grandchildren of the polio vaccine recipients.
Oh, my.
This SV40 thing.
So it carries on.
Yes, and the people who got it worse, frankly, were the people that got the syringe, because what happens there is you're injecting this thing straight into the blood supply.
Yes.
Okay, as opposed to the sugar cube, because your intestines and stuff provides a barrier there. And so you don't get as much of it. You don't get the same exact stuff. But the people that got the syringe, which are my brother and sister, both got cancer.
At what point? What onset in their life?
My sister's 40th birthday. So she got it when she was about 10 plus 30 years of incubation, right there at 40. And my brother, his started showing up late 40s, early 50s. Sure. He had skin cancer. She had breast cancer. It's the big problem. It's the elephant in the living room that nobody's talking about.
You know what? I don't even know if they have a polio vaccine anymore. Do they even need it?
Well, would they have it if they didn't need it? Probably. They do have one. They've recently switched back to this inactivated strategy, but they have better technology today than they had back then. And then there's the whole issue of vaccines in the first place, which is like another show in itself. But I even have an article from the New York Times which says they were withdrawing the polio vaccine, this is back in the 60s, until a monkey virus could be removed from it. It's not on page one. It's buried back in the thing. So you see these little chunks of evidence, but what you don't see is the media asking serious questions about this.
There were a lot of people who knew about this contamination problem, and they didn't say anything.
That's right. But this operation with the radiation in New Orleans was more like a medical Manhattan Project. I mean, that was a very tightly controlled group. And what we find, it's set up in 1960. We find Sarah Stewart, who's the person that discovers the cancer-causing virus. She suddenly, weird career move, she suddenly transfers from the National Cancer Institute over to the U.S. Public Health Service, which would put her in a position to be administratively in charge of this facility, meaning that
they bought her off.
She had the power to quarantine the city if something went wrong.
Right. This could be one of the biggest scandal stories I've ever heard, Ed.
Well, I think it is. I can't imagine anything bigger. This affects the health and safety of everybody. And it's a story that's so bad, frankly, that a lot of people don't even want to go there.
And then even now, though, we hear about this situation with the H1N1 virus and the vaccine and the fact that, we've got hundreds of millions of doses on the shelf. They're going to expire. I said way before this was even a major story and a major issue that this is not going to be a pandemic. It's all a bunch of bull. And, I couldn't understand where with 15 cases worldwide, the World Health Organization was saying that this was going to be a pandemic. It just didn't look right to me.
That's right. And, George, it's the exact same tactics they used on the polio thing.
I was going to say,
fear.
They haven't changed at all. They haven't stopped doing what they're doing. They've used that old playbook of creating the fear and just going for it. And I don't trust them with these kinds of vaccines anymore.
No, and you're not alone in that. I can't tell you the people that I talk to that just won't go near them.
Yeah. So what do you do beyond the book? What do you do to help publicize that? I mean, you're doing this national show with me now. This needs to get heard. This story needs to get out there.
Well, the thing that I think will get the story out there more than anything else would be a movie. And, we're working on that. And, the problem is movies are really expensive, and you got to get some of the same people you'd like to be pointing the finger at are involved in the money thing. So you got to be careful about all that. But we have the screenplay. We have the producers. We're in the process of trying to do that. And I think that will put it into a medium that the American people will be able to digest and respond to, the same way that Oliver Stone's JFK brought the JFK story to life and got all those documents released.
I've always said on this program, Ed, that there are no coincidences. And when you look at the story of the Oswald connection here and Kennedy and everything else, this stuff just doesn't happen by chance.
Yeah, truth is stranger than fiction. I'm all for that.
And did you not write in some of the interviews that you had been working on that there are some videos on your website, drmarysmonkey.com, that some of them, like, for example, you talk about an interview with a Dr. Edward Shorter, right?
Right. Shorter's interviewing Maurice Hilleman, the head of vaccine development for Merck. And Hilleman is just saying, hey, all our monkeys were hopelessly cross-contaminated. And the problem with the cross-contamination is this, that monkey they use for the polio virus is an Asian monkey. But it was put in cages with African monkeys, which carry another disease called SIV, which is the simian immunodeficiency virus. That is the direct ancestor
to AIDS,
to HIV-1. So what we've got here is you got a test tube that's not only got this SV40 in it that you're trying to get to mutate, but it's going to wind up having SIV in it too. And when you start shooting subatomic particles near the speed of light through a test tube and start hitting DNA, I mean, it's like shooting a gun into a computer. You're going to change something. And
go ahead.
And so what happens is, and this is all happening 1960, 61, and when AIDS comes out, I'm talking about pretty mainstream things like Scientific American. They publish a book called The Science of AIDS. And all the epidemiologists looking at this, they run their mathematical regressions back, and they say case one is 1960. And the moment they say that, you get all these weird medical articles coming out saying, oh, 1959, 1959. And now you got this ridiculous thing about the chimpanzees in the jungles in the 30s and stuff, which I can which we'll do in the next half hour. But the point is that the possibility that these people inadvertently mangled SIV and turned it into HIV while they were trying to develop a vaccine to stop SV40 is very realistic, very plausible, and in my opinion ought to be on the list of possible causes of AIDS.
How did it get out? How did it get out into the public? On purpose or accidental?
Well, I don't actually have the answer to that, but I promise you the people involved in this thing are capable of releasing it. You know, the earliest cases we know of are Haiti. I mean, in terms of real cases where the scientists are able to go in there and with their PCR and say that is HIV-1. The oldest HIV-1 that they know of is 1976 in Haiti, and that's according to the Los Alamos database. So when you get these claims of, you know, HIV-1 in chimpanzees, you know, it helps to know that chimpanzee happened to be in a government laboratory in 1982, you know. So, and I got all the names on this. I think your readers, your listeners, would be.
Well, they're also readers, believe me, heavy readers.
Would be very interested in hearing more about this chimpanzee link because it's, in my opinion, a total cover story.
All right, well, we'll talk about that when we come back, Ed, and we'll also go into some phone call modes. We'll take calls for the remaining part of this half hour and also next hour as well. Once again, where do you get the book?
Well, if you want to get it on the telephone tonight, there are people ready to handle your call, and we're packaging it with Me and Lee because the same publisher that sells both, and Me and Lee is the story of Oswald and Judy. And that's at 1-800-556-2012. And on my website, which is drmarysmonkey.com, but spell out doctor, I've got a special coast-to-coast thing that's $5 off that puts it down under the Amazon price for tonight. And, of course, you can always get it at either Amazon or any local bookstore can order it because it's in the catalog. Just Dr. Mary's Monkey.
It's a good read. We'll be back in a moment. We'll talk about this chimpanzee story and phone calls now for the rest of the night on Coast to Coast AM. On our next Coast to Coast program, we're going to be talking with the dead. I'm not kidding. Followed by open lines on Coast to Coast AM. And then when we come back now, we'll take an hour and a half of phone calls with the author of Dr. Mary's Monkey, Edward Haslam, on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast. Ed, let's talk about the chimpanzee story in depth here before we go to calls, if you would.
Yeah, sure. In the there have been various stories promoted over the years to try to put the origin of AIDS back in the 1950s. One was the Manchester semen story in Manchester, England, and they finally discovered the DNA of two people. in the sample, and that was discredited and officially withdrawn. They've been talking about this guy in Leopoldville in the Belgian Congo for ages. But if you study that, you realize that he probably had what's called LAV, which is lymphadenopathy-associated virus, which the French discovered at the Pasteur Institute. And each one of these stories, they come out with this big headline that's got like 1950s in it, and then you read the detail and it doesn't hold up. I mean, they're not even using the proper test to determine these things. So in the late 1990s, which is 3 years after I published my initial book, I was very interested to see a story that broke all across the newspapers and the media all around the world that said they had discovered the origin of HIV-1 in chimpanzees. And the first thing that catches my attention like that is that that's not the way a story is normally grows, okay? That usually means that somebody with a lot of power is releasing the story whenever you get it simultaneously like that.
Yes.
So I was very interested in this claim, and so I actually got the magazines and Time and those sorts of things, and I read this story, and it talked about this scientist at the University of Alabama. Her name was Beatrix Hahn, and she was a DNA specialist, and she held a press conference, very well attended, which said they had discovered HIV-1 in chimpanzee cells. Okay, very good. This happened to be 16 years after AIDS had shown up, and Harvard didn't catch this, Stanford didn't catch this, University of Chicago didn't catch this, National Cancer Institute didn't catch this. So why is this thing showing up here 16 years later at the University of Alabama? So I'm interested to find out where she got these chimpanzee cells from.
Mm-hmm.
And she says, well, a friend of mine sent them to me from Alamogordo, New Mexico.
Oh.
That's the White Sands missile base, okay? Yep. And I used to live in New Mexico, and I happen to be fairly familiar with the primate lab in Alamogordo. It was run by a fellow by the name of Fred Colson. And about a year before he died, Fred Colson gave an interview with a local health magazine or something, and he's very defensive of what he's done with the animals over the years, and he doesn't buy into all this PETA stuff and all that. So what happens is, Colson says in this interview I'm reading, that in 1982, the moment he heard about AIDS, he contacted people and said, I would like some of that blood so I can give it to my female chimpanzees to find out if this is passed between mother and child. Just so happens that the chimpanzee that Dr. Hahn's sample came from was a chimpanzee by the name of Marilyn, a female chimpanzee who died in Colson's laboratory 2 years later in 1984. And he had her cells cryovac, and they were in a freezer or refrigerator in his office. And when he died, they cleaned out the refrigerator, and they said, oh, here are some chimpanzee cells. Let's send them down to Beatrix Hahn. And that's how she gets her sample of the chimpanzee. It's from an essentially government-financed laboratory that had been doing experiments with AIDS for over 2 years before that chimpanzee died. So finding HIV-1 in a chimpanzee in a government laboratory, particularly a military one, proves absolutely nothing about the origin of AIDS. But it's a very convenient answer for those who want to make you think it came out of the jungles of Africa. So they finance her, and she's over in the jungle of Africa, and her people are picking up chimpanzee poo on the trails and analyzing them and all this other stuff. And they haven't found HIV-1 over there. They found the cousin of it, which we've known all along was the ancestor. Okay,
what's going on at Plum Island? Do you know?
No, I don't. Okay. I need to stick to what I know, and I don't know enough about that to talk about it on the radio.
All right. Well, let's take some calls here.
Okay.
Let's go to Texas City, Texas. Paulie, you're up with us on Coast to Coast. Hi, Paulie.
Yes, hi. My gosh, aren't you a little bit afraid, for your own safety, being, blowing the lid off of something that could, basically implicate just every phase and facet of any societal, standard? I mean, what I'm thinking is possibility of maybe, perhaps rebuilding those cells, with nutrition or something. But do you know anything about any way that this could be taken care of?
Well, let me start with the fear part of that question. And I simply had to make a decision a long time ago whether I was going to talk about this in public or not. And I made the decision that the issue was too big. I mean, once I realized that we have a cancer epidemic today, and this is probably where it came from, that I made the decision that this was simply my job to do for America. I mean, some guys wound up on the beaches of Iwo Jima. I didn't do that. But this is my job. And I went past that go, no-go point back in the 1990s. And I will say I have not had a trace of trouble since then, but part of that is because of how I handle myself. On the what can we do about it issue, the best and maybe the only defense we have against any of this is our immune system.
Yes,
and
I would
so
agree with that.
Take care of yourself.
Your father was a naval commander, wasn't he?
Yes.
Yeah, I spent 9 years in the Navy myself. And did this story, which, you got some exposure because of him and his work, were you driven because of, his work as a medical doctor?
I think that's a part of it, but I think it's a fairly small part.
Okay.
My personal contact with the story, I sat on Mary Sherman's lap as a child. Okay? I mean, this story is pretty close to me. I was not real anxious to get into such a dark story so close to my family. I mean, to me, that was very nerve-wracking at the beginning of this. But one of the things is that my father's father was also a doctor, and he developed the original anthrax vaccine. And I have documents about that posted on my website. And one of the things he was very clear on, and my father communicated this to me, is the fact you're either a doctor or a soldier. You don't use medicine to kill. Okay? If you take that oath, that's it. And my father was very much in that camp. In fact, I think the reason that my father left the Navy, which was an organization that he thoroughly enjoyed being he was a commander at 29, George. Can you imagine what his career would have looked like after that?
Oh, my God. He would have been an admiral.
Of course. And so all of a sudden he comes home one day and tells my mother, I'm out of the Navy. And this is 1946, 47 when they weren't letting doctors out. So what went on? And we know that Navy was involved in all kind of nefarious bioweapon and chemical weapon research at the time. I think they just asked him to do something that he was unwilling to do because of the ethical thing. And so I will say that within my own family, there's a strong ethical tradition that says medicine is not used as a weapon. And so that's part of what I carry with me as I get on national radio and talk to people about this.
Lewistown, Montana. It's Ted's turn on Coast to Coast. Ted, go ahead.
Hi. Very interesting show tonight. I flew for airlines and Air Force for 32 years as a professional pilot. And once I moved over to the airline part of it, the Airline Pilots Association ran studies on the pilots. And, of course, back then most of us were men because that's just who got hired coming out of the various services. And they found that the airline pilots only got one kind of cancer more than average, and that was melanoma because of the very bright light up at altitude. But on all the other ones, the cancer rates were 0.008 of what the normal guy on the ground would get, down to 5 zeros and an 8 for the number 10 cancer, which indicates that the radiation at altitude was killing the pathogen, which I think he pointed out was probably a virus. And it's amazing to me that medicine can't figure that out and a bunch of people flying airplanes can. I just don't understand where medicine is going that they can't figure it out, unless it's just nothing more than a money-making proposition for the oncologists.
Well, I
don't know.
Ted, I think you've hit the nail on the head there. It's a very interesting comment that you've made about the airline study. And, I go back to Will Rogers, like we have the best government money can buy. The pharma industry. I mean, my father eventually resigned from the American Medical Association because he considered them a bunch of pill pushers for the pharmacies. And that's part of the problem. And when you're dealing with, what would you say is the average cost for chemotherapy for somebody? I'm going to put the number, say, at $200,000. Okay, you multiply that times 1.5 million cases a year, and you start to realize that the enormity of the economic force behind all of this, and you start to realize why all they want to talk about is cure. They don't want to talk about cause. I mean, I found an incredible story in the media once. I was so shocked by it. I went to the newspaper and sat down with the editor to talk to him about it. And they said, cancer rate not set in childhood. Well, what does that mean? That the vaccine you got is not causing your cancer? And what I found out when you read the detail of the article, again, the big print giveth and the little print taketh away, what I found in the detail of it was this was a story of people born in Vietnam who went to Canada and had free health care, and less people died in Canada than in Vietnam. And they were skewing the headline in order to put it in this context that you don't have to worry about the vaccines. I mean, there's big money behind this, and I think big money has a lot to do with it. And when you get into who sat on what board of directors, you wind up the usual suspects. I mean, this place in Indiana, what is the name? The big pharmacy in Indianapolis. Well, it turns out the Quayles own it, and George W. Bush sat on the board of directors. So there's a lot of overlap.
Is that Lilly?
Yeah, it's Lilly, Eli Lilly. Yeah. Sorry, thank you. It's 4:00 in the morning where I am.
Well, that's okay. Well, when you talk about cause and effect, how many years? It was for 44 years, I think. Jerry Lewis has been holding this telethon to try to battle muscular dystrophy. 44 years. And he has probably raised a couple $2 billion, I would guess, or close to it. We still don't have a cure for muscular dystrophy. That's a lot of money that has gone into research every season. He raises $60, $80 million. I'm sure there's more money flowing. That's a lot of money, Ed. And still no cure.
It's the issue of the sheriff catches the bad guy, then he's no longer a hero,
Next up, we go to Bradenton, Florida, east of the Rockies. Tony, good morning.
Hey, George. Another great show. Thank you very much.
Sure thing.
I just got two questions that I just want to clarify because it's so confusing, this webbing to me. I'd just like your guest to reiterate what he said before. I just want to know, why was Mary killed and who killed her, and I'll take my answers off the air. Thanks again, George.
Okay. Go ahead.
Well, those are questions that nobody's got clear answers to, because unless you interviewed the person that killed her, you wouldn't know what the real motives were. The fact that she happened to die the morning that the Warren Commission started its investigation into Oswald, and you realize that she was connected to Oswald, that raises a lot of suspicions for people. I personally think that the laboratory was the target, not her, per se. And, for example, if Dr. Oshner had been the one who walked in there and flipped the switch and his arm had been blown off, they wouldn't have been able to take him back to his apartment and call it a sex slashing, which is what they did to Mary Sherman, who was a widow from out of town without a family in the area.
She knew too much, didn't she?
Well, she certainly knew a lot. I mean, just like they wouldn't let Oswald into a courtroom, I don't think they wanted anybody asking Mary Sherman questions about all this. I'm not sure, I'm more of the opinion that this was a battle over the White House, and the people were playing really serious games with their own private people doing this. But somebody tampered with and sabotaged the electrical wiring in that thing, which is why she got electrocuted. That's my take on it. And whether that was to shut her up over Oswald or whether that was to blow Oswald had a ID card on him made out to A.J. Heidel, which came from the U.S. Public Health Service hospital. This is the evidence that's laying on the table at the exact time that there is this incident at the U.S. Public Health Service hospital. I mean, does that not call your attention to it? And where is this place? It's a half a mile from Lee Oswald's apartment. It's a half a mile from Dr. Oshner's house. It's about a mile from Mary Sherman's apartment. It's right in the center of all this.
It is too bizarre. What about witnesses to some of these events? Do you have good witnesses?
As far as I'm concerned, we do. Let me say that the original witness to this would have been Lee Oswald, and he was killed. And the next witness was Jack Ruby, and the odds, that one looks like he was injected with cancer to shut him up, too, because he was knowledgeable of this activity in New Orleans.
What happened to David Ferry?
I've had people who are professional pathologists tell me that David Ferry was murdered. Officially, the coroner said he died of natural causes. I think, given the timing on it, it looks like he was professionally silenced, meaning killed. But people could argue over that one. Officially, he was not murdered. Officially, it was natural causes. Judy, who's the girl who worked in the lab in David Ferry's apartment, is the primary witness at this point in time. And then the question that comes up from that is, well, was there anybody who saw Judy and Lee Oswald together? And yes, there is, and I have a video of her on my website, drmarysmonkey.com, and her name is Anna Lewis, and she was actually the wife of David Lewis, who worked for Guy Bannister, and they used to socialize with Lee and Judy, and they would, like, double date, and she talks about this on camera, and so there is another live witness to the witness that supports all this. There are other people that are alive that I don't want to get into their names because I'd like them to stay that way, who are very knowledgeable of this, and if the right person asks them the question, like, before Congress, they might even get a straight answer out of them.
Did the Warren Commission ever ask or interview Judy?
No. That's why she's alive, basically. I mean, what's amazing is that it was Moynihan, who was Judy's boss at the Riley Coffee Company, who testifies to the Warren Commission but doesn't mention Judy. And the other thing is that Judy's signature is on Lee Oswald's time cards. So when the Warren Commission asked Moynihan about that, he gave the commission a list of the dates and times that Oswald clocked in and out, and the Riley Coffee Company gave the FBI Oswald's time cards. However, they didn't put it in the Warren Commission. Why not?
Exactly. We're going to take another final hour of phone calls with you, Ed, when we come back on Coast to Coast AM. The story is Dr. Mary's Monkey. The author, Edward Haslam, will be back. How does the JFK assassination fit into this very strange story of Dr. Mary's Monkey? We'll find out when we come back on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back. We're with Ed Haslam. We're talking about Dr. Mary's Monkey. How does all this, and I'm going to spend some time, Ed, talking with you about the cancer epidemic here, but how does this all turn into the JFK connection?
Well, let me just go for the jugular on that.
Let's do it.
We know that the former president of the American Cancer Society is the person that set up the media coverage of Lee Oswald's leafleting and stuff in New Orleans in the summer of 1963. We know this because he, the former president of the American Cancer Society, whose name is Dr. Alton Oshner Sr., actually produced a record album of Oswald's radio debates, which said that he was responsible for it. And I've got a copy of that here in the house, and that's in the book. And so there is once you realize you've connected these two people, this lone nut thing just goes away. And then when you realize that what they're doing is they're trying to kill Castro, well, so much for the Commie Pinko thing. I mean, what they're trying to do is set up Oswald to look like he's doing that. And